Hey everyone, I'm gonna show you how to make a couple of transitional sound effects using Massive as well as some other plugins. We're gonna open up a new sound, start off from scratch, and route the first two oscillators as well as the noise generator to filter 1. Generally for swooshy sound effects it's a good idea to use noise, so we're gonna use white noise. And make it go through a low pass filter. The idea is to make a rising filter sweep that would gradually open up higher frequencies. That is going to be our build up for the transition itself. And generally I prefer to use automation for this, but in this case we will use an envelope with a slow attack and a fast decay. The result sounds something like this. We can adjust the length of the sweep, but it really depends on the purpose of the sound effect, so I'm just gonna make mine a bit more snappy. Before we move on to the transition itself, I want to layer the sound a little bit, so I'm gonna add a sine wave on top. And for oscillator 2, I'm gonna use a more or less random analog wave. And then pitch it up by an octave. That sounds pretty good, but still a little bit incomplete, so I'm gonna use reverb to make a tail. I'm just gonna adjust the reverb settings a little bit, but it is worth noting that in many reverb plugins, changing the size will also affect pitch. And we can actually use that to our advantage by making a sweep that will shape the tail of the reverb. And this time I'm gonna use automation. That actually sounded right, but I did hear some pitch modulation going on in the build-up. So I'm gonna mess around with the automation envelopes until I'm more or less comfortable with the sound. That does sound better, but I'd still like to make it a bit more exciting. So I'm just gonna use some FM modulation on oscillator 1. That was pretty great, but not exactly what we're looking for. Now I'm gonna take envelope 3, which we're already using for the low pass filter, and make it affect the FM modulation of oscillator 1. You can hear a sharp electrical layer of sound present, which I think sounds quite nice. And now, just for comparison, we're gonna play all the layers without any reverb. Alright, now I'm gonna step outside of Massive for a little bit and play around with a couple of extra plugins. I'm going to use Reaper's native pitch shifter, and it doesn't really matter what you use, but I find that if you have a 4-man shifter, that's a really powerful tool. That was a rather extreme example, of course, but you can get some very interesting results using the 4-man shifter, which I'm going to show you now. One of the problems here is that we're using Massive's internal reverb unit, which is under the pitch shifter in the effects chain. I don't think you should do that, as most pitch shifters aren't good enough to process reverb, especially when it comes to 4-mans. Still, I'm gonna try to fix the sound by changing the white noise to tape hiss to get rid of the highs. But to be honest, I think it'd be much better to get rid of Massive's reverb and use an external plugin instead. I will use ValhallaShimmer, which is really nice for big and powerful sounds. We can be fairly flexible with the settings except for a couple of things. First of all, the low cut knob should be definitely used to get rid of all the low end noise, and there is going to be a lot of it when we automate the size knob. Second, the size knob should affect pitch just like it did in Massive to get a desirable effect. Here's a sound comparison with the size value set to 0. and then automate it. Quite beautiful, but we should definitely adjust the levels, as there's way too much clipping. That still sounds a bit off to me, so I'd like to change some of the automation values to make it more swift. I'm gonna go for the 4-man change and edit that a little bit. That really sounds like a spaceship passing by, or maybe a sports car, and we can emphasize the impact by changing the width to go from mono to stereo, making it seem like the object teleports somewhere or simply disappears. Or we can do the opposite and go from stereo to mono to make it seem like the object implodes. Now I'd like to point out something very important that I should have mentioned a long time ago. You can use a lot of various unique and interesting plugins, but always remember that one of the greatest sound design tools is equalization. So if at some point you're stuck making a sound, instead of trying out different combinations of 1,000 features, just try out EQ. And at this point I'm really tired of clipping, so I'm just gonna put on a soft compressor. That was a bit too much, but nevertheless potentially useful. I'm just gonna make the compressor a bit softer. There you go. There is a lot we can experiment with, but I will leave that for you to explore. All the best renditions of these sounds and more are available to download for free using the link in the description under the video. I do hope you found this video useful, and you can check out the second part of the video where I use the same sound to get a different outcome. Thank you for watching.